The other day we jumped into Pro Tools pretty quickly, so I want to take a step back and more slowly go over a couple things. So I've gone ahead and I have launched Pro Tools from the dock, and I have the opening dashboard. We're going to create a session from scratch. So I'm just going to call this test one, me and my tests. Basically, whenever I call something test, I can throw it out. Local storage, it's going to be saved locally on our hard drive here. Wave is the file format, and that's going to, it's a standard. Bit depth, 24-bit, 48K. So that's basically my operating start. Bit depth and sample rate relate to the quality of recording. So if you're recording a microphone, how good is that going to sound when it's converted from the analog world to the digital world? You can raise the bit depth up to 32-bit floating or the sample rate up to 192. CD quality audio is actually 16-bit, 44.1. So typically when I have you output your material, I have you output it at 44.1 16-bit because that is considered, essentially the music standard, even though that is really changing with streaming and things like that. But we don't output MP3s. They're not as full fidelity. They don't sound as good. I mean, we do, but I prefer to keep it good quality. Interleaved has to do with how stereo tracks are managed. Won't get into that too much right now. And location. Location is very, very important. Where is your folder, is your session folder going to end up when you create it? And this is a hierarchy. So essentially, it's your user login. There is a user folder, essentially, underneath which you have your own login by period, whether it's second, fifth, seventh, etc. And then the final destination, the desktop. If this does not say desktop, you can always click on the location and change that location. Right now, I've changed it to the applications folder, which would be a complete and utter bad call. So hopefully we'll see, as soon as I hit create, you're going to see a folder created. There you go. And I'm not going to get into the contents of the folder quite yet because I just want to give some basic operating reminders. So remember we talked about tempo and that the default tempo of any session in Pro Tools is 120 BPM. We can change the tempo a couple of different ways. We can click on this plus sign and type in the tempo that we want, or we can turn off the conductor and scroll up and down in this little window here, or we can click on it and enter a tempo, and when we hit return, that tempo is engaged. I would recommend turning off the conductor and doing your tempo that way. And that is because when you do it with this plus sign, that is a tempo change, as you can see. And if your cursor does not happen to be at the beginning of the song and you hit that plus sign, you can insert a tempo change at an odd place in the song. And there are times that you want to do that, and we'll talk about that. But you don't want to be at 120 and then all of a sudden 67 if you want your whole song to be 67. So, what am I doing here? There we go. So just turn off the conductor and have your manual tempo be set that way. Okay, so click track, create click track. Now we have a tempo of 90. The couple things that I want to talk about really fast, well, let's make another track. It's a stereo track. I'm going to make a mono track. Doesn't really matter. I don't really want you to do this as much as understand what I am doing. I'm going to insert an instrument. So this is really important. If you don't see the insert column, you can customize so much of what you see. Some of you may be looking at a whole bunch of stuff that you don't know what it is. So actually, I recommend you don't need comments right away. You certainly don't need mic preamps. You don't need inserts F through J until you already use all of A through E, and you don't need the sends here. So my recommendation is that you have instrument, inserts A through E, I/O, and track color, which is not really taking up much space. So your I/O column, your inserts column, your instrument column, and your track color is really just that little bit there. So it's inserts A through E. If you want an instrument, you click on this first slot of your track that you're trying to use to make some music. Plug in, you scroll down to instrument, and you scroll down to expand to, or any instrument, but we're going to use expand. And up comes expand. I'm going to very quickly click on factory default under presets and put in a drum kit. I'm going to very quickly go over to the Midi Editor. This is the bug that we learned the other day. I cannot click on anything because next to the word drums, I need to have this pencil. And I got that simply by clicking on it. I'm going to put in a very quick drum beat. By the way, I am simply double clicking. So I'm not using the pencil, I'm using the grabber. So you can double click and enter, but if you click on the pencil, you can single click. All right, so I have a measure drum beat. Duplicated it a couple times. So by clicking and then hitting Command D or Edit and duplicate, you can have contiguous clips. All right, so the only thing I really wanted to go over in this is these, what are called edit modes. Slip and grid are the ones I'm going to talk about primarily right now. Slip, if you zoom in, or if I zoom in, you can see your grid values. Slip allows you to move very freely within the grid. Grid mode only allows you to move to the grid values. Other DAWs call this snap to, and I think that's not a bad way to describe it because it snaps to the grid value. Now, that is really useful when you're starting out to make music because we want to place things directly on the beats where we want them. And we want to be able to move things and know that when I move that by a quarter note or I move it by a measure, it's very easy to kind of see and feel where I have moved that clip. If I'm in slip mode, and let's say I want to move it to the beginning of beat 3, it looks like I'm there, but if I zoom in, I'm not. And we need to be really accurate when we're making music. And we'll talk about why at times we don't want to be that accurate, but for now we want to be accurate. So slip allows you to move very freely and precisely, and when we edit, we may indeed be doing that in slip. Grid just moves to the grid value. We're going to leave shuffle and spot alone. We really don't need them except for very specific uses. The other thing about the grid, which is so important to our music making, is the ability to see it or hide it with this button that's called grid also, and then set the value of our grid, the grid value, which is the musical note next to the word. So if you click on that, you can make your grid half notes or whole measures or even 64th notes, which is very difficult to work in. I always recommend that you leave your grid at 16th notes. It is, there are enough grid values to kind of move things around, but not so many that's hard to see. Most important, it is most important when you're putting in MIDI information because we want to have control over where we place things but we don't want to have so few options that like I can't put my grid, I can't put my beat on the second 16th note if I have quarter notes. So 16th note grid, you can turn it on and off. Grid value, grid mode versus slip mode.